Shoot.
Welcome back to Dangerous Rhetoric, folks. Before I jump into it, as always, I will remind you, please like, comment, subscribe. Definitely comment. We like to hear people's thoughts and feedback on the episode, and that excites us. And we like to do premieres as well. So if you're sitting here watching the premiere, please participate in the chat. We love that. And if you want to help support us, you can donate. You can give us crypto. You can give us regular fiat currency and all that good stuff. We will take
links in the description. DM for crypto donations.
Links in the description. We got to get like a subscribe star up too, or something like that, so people can like have like a fixed amount maybe if they want to do something like that. That would be great. With all that said, today we are joined once again by the based, problematic grifter, Gothix. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. I have to update my title on Twitter because that sounded much better than what I have. All right, thank you.
Problematic grifter. Yes. So, for those who haven't seen, we had Gothix on before. I think that was like episode 43 or something like that. So that was at the beginning of the year. It's crazy that I think it's like 9-10 months.
So many episodes
since then. So in that episode, we went a bit into your backstory and how, you walked away from the left, or we should say maybe pushed away from the left. So if anyone's interested more in Gothix's backstory and how she ended up where she is today as a political social commentary from being a streamer, go watch that first episode. We went into a lot of interesting things in that. But yeah, today we'll maybe touch on some of those previous topics like abortion and things like that. But I think the first thing that I want to jump into and talk about was this recent debate that you moderated that was put on by the Walkaway movement and organized by Brandon Straka. And it was
bravo, by the way. Great job. It was a real challenge.
And it was a nice lengthy debate as well. And I found it very just insightful. There was a lot to chew on. And it was basically a battle between the, Black Leftists and some Black rightists or conservatives, and them kind of discussing the major issues in about race in the country today. So Black Lives Matter, policing, the family unit and family values, reparations, things like that. And I wanted to hear more of your thoughts and reflections about that debate, because obviously you were moderating, so it wasn't your place really to weigh in on those topics. It was just your place to kind of make sure everyone was being cordial with each other and not going over time. But how did that come about? How did you get invited to do that? And what were your thoughts about that whole event? Do you think it went well?
Yeah, I think the event went really well. Brandon reached out to me and I told him that I'm not good at doing actual debates, like participating in it. I feel like I need some time to chew on a question, really think about my answer, maybe have to write it down. So I wouldn't be good in those situations anyway. But as far as moderating, I had never done it before, but he thought that I would bring some type of a different look to, I guess, the right. Because I think often when people think of conservatism or being on the right, it's sort of like you get this image in your head of what that looks like. And I think that might be part of the problem of why there's so much division between political lines. Is you look on the left, you think one thing, you look on the right, it's like, okay, everyone's like, I don't know what they imagine, but I imagine
they're all white.
They see
and Christian and
suit wearing,
nationalist, and some of that is true, but
checked off the boxes, yeah. And I wanted to participate because I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. I have the perspective of both sides too, where it's like, I think it's very interesting to see how people on the left still come to their conclusions and then see how those conclusions could eventually evolve into something else. So I had a great time.
Well, you said you had never done it before. That's not totally true. The first time I came across you was because of a debate you hosted on your channel, which was why we invited you on the show to begin with. And I featured Christian Watson, Michael Moreno, and a couple other, I think they were some woke professors. I think they were college professors, and they were white too, which was interesting because they were, arguing for CRT, and then you had you and like Christian arguing against CRT. I think Karlin Boroshenko was also part of that.
Yeah, see, I memory hold that, so I didn't even remember.
I remember you thinking it was rather like a train wreck, but I still found it fascinating, and I sat through that entire thing and watched the whole thing, and that was why I ended up inviting Christian on the show, and how we came across you and invited you on. So you have a bit of experience moderating.
Wow. Yeah, but as you can see in that debate that you just mentioned, I was laughing the entire time because I'm just like, this is ridiculous. The whole concept of two black people arguing against CRT to two white people is just ridiculous anyway.
It was entertaining.
It really is like parody brought to life.
Yeah.
Like it's one of those things where, you know, life imitates art. You're just like, this is so ironic that your brain just wants to explode.
So before we went on, you know, and we started, Brent mentioned, you know, during the debates that how often you had to say, you know, time, you know, you have to remind people when they're going too far or like they're about to run out of time to have their response.
Rein them in a little bit when they're on their rants.
I definitely noticed you had to do that more for the people on the left than the people on the right. I don't know if it's just they took longer to get their point across or if they just really wanted to like, I don't know, just go as long as possible and push that boundary.
Well, that's
just something I noticed.
That's what leftists do, right? They're constantly brushing up against the boundaries. That some of them want to get rid of the boundaries altogether. You know, if the leftists had their way, they would be the only one at that event being able to speak their piece at all.
Well, here are the people on the panel, by the way, just, you know, to let everyone in the audience know. So on the left side, we had Robert Patillo, M. Reese Everson, and Rashad Singleton. And then from the right-wing side, we had Shamika Michelle. Love her. She's great. Delano Squires and Malik Abdul. I found him incredibly poised and very actually, I want to invite him on the show. He was very interesting to me. You know, but do you think that's true? Do you felt like you had to kind of moderate the left side a little bit more?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing is, too, it's like we were talking about it behind stage before we got on. And the questions were, are we going to be a little bit flexible with the time? Like if there's some good, rigorous conversation going back and forth, would I allow the time to go a little more? And we had to, for the most part, be very strict because if we allowed everyone to just say their piece for like 5 minutes straight, it would have been like a 5-hour long debate.
Yeah.
So it really just came down to like at my discretion. If I felt like you're actually getting to the point, then I would, you know, I would let you, you know, a few more seconds just to finish up your sentence. But I think it was more prevalent on the left because, and no disrespect to any of the panelists, I really applaud everyone from coming together and to say their piece because that takes a lot of balls to do that.
It does.
But I got this impression that it was more of like theatrics with the left. And this is something that I noticed even when I'm just engaging in civil debate online, not even in an official debate setting where it's more theatrics, it's more pulling on the heartstrings, it's more feelings, it's like a script, whereas on the right, it's here's this data, here's how it's affecting us today. And let me give you some examples of what we can do to like solve this issue that doesn't rely on emotional manipulation.
They also on the right, they tended to like, you know, when their time ran out, one of the things I noticed, they would stop and then later on, if they had a chance, they would try to return to a point that they didn't get to wrap up when their time finished, which I thought was, you know, more respectful. They were only trying to take the amount of time that was allotted to them, even if it meant maybe having less time to answer a different question just to return to another point. You mentioned the emotion thing, you know, pulling on the heartstrings. I agree with you there. There's only one who I felt didn't do that so much, but the really tall guy, who was him? Who was he? Was that
Rashad?
Rashad, he was definitely doing that. And then I think it was M. Reese Everson, right? She was the other woman on the panel. Man, just almost like every response she gave, I felt like she was always bringing up the lynching of Black people, like constantly just evoking that imagery and trying to just pull on the heartstrings. And every time she would do that, you know, Malik would respond and just be like, Malik and Delano, they would just be like, you know, well, we're talking about the present. Yeah. You know, like that is the past. And their response is, well, you can't talk about the present without acknowledging the past. which there's a point to that, sure. But the thing with the left and, you know, the whole woke ideology that I noticed is there's a fixation on the past. And even the word woke is past tense of wake. Yeah. It's just something interesting to note there. It's past tense of wake. They are not awake in the present. They are fixated on the past.
Yeah, I agree with you. And sure, to some degree, you have to address the past before moving on. We're aware, we understand. Now what? The issue is they just want to marinate in that. And what's crazy to me is a lot of people that bring up these points about how Black people are oppressed and they can't get ahead in America. Most of these people are very well off for themselves. And to me, it seems very contradicting for you to stand up there and say that Black people can't make it when you yourself are living proof of that. And I think it would be more beneficial for you to direct the conversation to, okay, this is how I did it. This is how you can do it too. Because if I were to ask these people, how is white supremacy and systemic racism affecting you today? They'll usually bring up, from my experience, they'll bring up some type of something that happened to them personally, but then they missed the part of, okay, you overcame that. So what are we talking about?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give them a little leeway here, and perhaps they're not so much arguing that Black people can't make it, and more so arguing that there are all these obstacles in the way for them making it. But, you know, how many of those obstacles are just windmills that you're erecting and fighting off? They're not real obstacles, because you can bring up your personal experience, sure, but for every, you know, Black person who brings up that personal experience that they felt held them back, there are others who bring up that wasn't their experience, right? And I forgot, I think it was Delano Squires, he brought up, you know, I grew up in South Side of Chicago and New York City, and I lived in all these places, and that wasn't my experience. You know, when I walked down the street, I wasn't being chased by KKK members and that sort of thing. And then, you know, they bring up the Black on Black crime issue as well, which, yes, we know there's crime within any demographic. You know, most white people are going to commit crimes against other white people, and most whatever group that, you know, Latinos, they'll commit crimes against other Latinos. That's what happens when you have a bunch of people grouped together in a place and there's poverty and that sort of thing. But when they bring this up, they're not bringing it up to try to dismiss those points. They're bringing it up to acknowledge there's a cultural issue happening here. For example, there was another rapper shot recently. I'm trying to remember his name. He was, you know, a member of Migos. And this is something that we're really not acknowledging. Every time this comes up, you know, maybe they'll talk about the guns, and that's what they try to say is the problem here, that we need more limitations on guns. But for me, it very much seems like there's a cultural issue that is not being addressed. The glorification of the gang violence and the street life and all of that stuff. And who benefits from that?
Don't get me started on Chicago, though, because they were doing hot drops of crates of weapons in Chicago multiple times over the past couple of decades. So this is a story that got scrubbed from the internet. So the violence in Chicago, I think, is being definitely artificially stimulated, just like how they're doing it across the board with these Soros installed DAs. They want more crime.
Tinfoil hat, Brent.
It's not even. This is just like evident on the record. All the Soros DAs, look what they do. I mean, they're all big on having the no bail. You know, they get these guys back out on the streets, even the violent ones. The original idea of, you know, giving bail to no bail to non-violent offenders, you know, when it's a minor crime, I understand that. That's fine. You know, you have a minor incident, you know, no bail. Okay. But when you're violent, when you're hurting people, when your, you know, charges are sex crimes, these kind of things, those people should be locked up, you know, not given an opportunity to offend again between the time that they get caught for the crime and when they, you know, we have the judicial bandwidth for a trial.
So I wanted to bring up this guy as well, Robbie Starbuck. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yeah,
great.
So, you know, after that shooting of the Migos member happened, he put out a really, really great response to that. And he's someone who's worked in the music industry, and he used to manage different rappers and, you know, helped put together their music videos and that sort of thing. And he was basically making an open call to these rappers of saying, like, we need to address these cultural issues and why these shootings keep happening. And the fact that the music industry does not care about you, doesn't care about Black folks, and very much promotes this glorification of violence and criminal activity and all that stuff. And he's like, you know, I know you guys, I've met a lot of you guys, you're good men, you're family men. Like, why do you go up there and put on this display as if you're these like hard gangster types? And in the end, it doesn't benefit you. It only benefits these corporations who are using you. So, you know, I found that video very, very powerful. You know, anyone who hasn't seen it, I recommend you go look up Robbie Starbuck and go watch that video of his response to that recent shooting. But I just, you know, how do we deal with this? Like, is there a way to really address the cultural issues that isn't going to trigger the left and make them just automatically dismiss you and say, oh, well, you're not addressing this and this and that, and racism is systemic, this and that?
Yeah, it's definitely difficult because the left is notoriously against self-accountability and criticism. They take any and all criticism about a specific group of people and say, well, that's racist, that's anti-Black, whatever. And they always want to redirect the conversation. What about them? It's like a child. If you have two kids and you're disciplining one child, that child keeps bringing up what the other kid did. I'm not talking about little Timmy. I'm talking about you.
Yeah.
And from me, the only thing that I think we could do now is just to stop supporting it. Like the people that say, you know, Black Lives Matter or Black people are getting gunned down or whatever, or hate gang violence. These are the people that are probably still supporting this type of music. They're going to the concerts, they're buying the music, they're dancing to it in the clubs. Think of all of the folks these last couple of years who have been propped up by the Biden administration, like all of these rappers. Why are they propping up these people? Like, if we listen to the lyrics, they're not good. Like, they're actually very derogatory. So why are we doing it? And it's because people are they are products of their environment. And if that's all they listen to, you know, because we have to think about the bigger picture where the Black community in particular has a lot of single parent households.
Yes.
And it's like this cycle where, okay, if you're growing up in a single parent household and then you go to the streets looking for more of a family, you get caught up in like the drug life or the gang life, and then you also, you know, these gangbangers, they're not listening to country on the streets, right? They're listening to hip hop and rap, and that type of music is just keeping them in this cycle. And yeah, you're never gonna get anything fixed. So
yeah, see, I listen to some hip hop and some rap, and you know, I personally think there is a way for rappers to use the music itself to get through to those folks and maybe hold a mirror up to them. Yeah. And I feel like, you know, rappers like Kendrick Lamar have very much been trying to do that. J. Cole, you know, those rappers where maybe if you listen on the surface, it sounds like they're glorifying the lifestyle. But if you really listen to it, it's like they're telling a story about how this is the environment they came out of. And here is how destructive it is. And here's why we need to get away from that. And for many of them, it was difficult to get out of that. And that I sympathize with that. You know, I understand that. But I think, you know, who Robbie is addressing is these rappers who are singing about that lifestyle as if it like was somehow, like I said, glorious, like something that you should be proud of, when maybe you shouldn't, you know. Like,
what's that one that's like Little Devil Worshipper?
Who?
He's the one that was like had that music video where he was like humping the devil.
Oh,
he's Black.
not
I don't know. Does he count as a rapper though?
Is that it?
It's like a memer. I don't even know.
He's a rapper, but he's also like an R&B artist. I don't know, but yeah, you know, this sort of imagery of just glorifying promiscuity and glorifying violence and
literal Satanism in his case.
But it's just like the reason why I bring up people like Kendrick is because they have songs that on the surface it might sound like that's what they're doing, but if you really get down to the nitty-gritty of it, it's like, no, this is a warning. You know, you're warning people.
Kendrick is also a rare bird though.
He is rare, and there's a lot of indication in his songs even that he possibly killed someone and something like that. That's a whole theory. He's never been like totally upfront about that, but there's a lot that's indicated that when he was young he perhaps made a mistake of that sort, and that's one of the things that kind of redirected him and his path. And now his latest record was just, there was a lot of religious and Christian themes on it, which I think was interesting. And
got in the field from the debate.
No, well, I think this stuff is definitely it's relevant. You know, I wish there were more rappers who were trying to address these things in that way, to use the art to then reach that community who perhaps normally won't listen to people like us. They are going to be more prone to listen to rappers.
Yeah, I haven't listened to Kendrick in a while. You know, it's funny you mentioned the whole Christian thing. I haven't listened to his new album, so I don't know exactly what he's rapping about. But I know he was making like some headlines because of, I guess he was depicting himself as like Jesus on stage, which is not good. Like he was wearing like the thorn crown with blood and everything. It's really weird.
The thing is, if you actually listen to the record and what he's saying in that album, he's actually saying the opposite of that.
It's so
He's
interesting.
Saying this is how people view me. This is what they do to me. They idolize me as this voice of a generation. They expect me to comment on George Floyd and comment on this and comment on that. And the whole point of the record, really, the whole message of it, when you get down to it, is I'm not a savior. I'm just a man. That's really what he was saying on that album. So definitely listen to it, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. I think, you know, if people really delved into what he was doing in that album and the art, it has like the potential to like kind of heal the country, some of the things that we're going through right now.
Yeah, I'll take a look, because I think one of my gripes that I did have with him, it sounds like maybe things are shifting, is it sounded like he was race baiting a lot. You know, and I think that with this conversation about like hip hop and how rappers should use their platforms to talk about like positive messages, there's also this thing that's embedded in a lot of Black people's minds, and it's this idea that you're going to lose your Black card.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of Black people feel like they have something to prove if you don't fit in this box, if you don't support certain things.
So he agrees with you, actually.
Yeah.
Like I said, if you get down to the nitty gritty of the lyrics,
I'll have to check it out.
you realize, like, oh, he's changed. So one of the things he did on this record was he brought another rapper on, Kodak Black, who, you know, really gangster, hard type, but like likes Trump, and was pardoned by Trump as well. And Kodak got, you know, canceled a lot for that. And Kendrick has more of a history of criticizing Trump and being against that. So I think it was a really powerful statement for him to bring Kodak on his record, have him do backing vocals, give him an entire track to himself on the album. And he even has a lyric on there where, in the song Savior, where Kendrick says, you know, they like it when I'm pro-Black, but I'm more Kodak Black.
Okay.
He's saying that, you know, I'm more like this guy than you guys probably want to admit. You know, and he talks a lot about the, you know, cancel culture and these sorts of things and how it's destroying art in a way. So, like I said, he's changed something about him. You know, he went silent for like 2 years, didn't talk about George Floyd, didn't post the Black Square, and people were like, "Where's Kendrick? Where's Kendrick? Why aren't you commenting on these things?" And I think that drove him nuts, because he wanted to step back and really evaluate what was happening in the world. And there were all these people who were making all these assumptions about him and what he should say and how he should think for being a Black artist.
Interesting.
So, yes, I'm telling you, listen to the album, read the lyrics. I keep telling everyone, I'm like, it's good, it's powerful.
Daniels is very into music.
I do love music. Yeah.
Nice. Cool.
So, any other thoughts about the debate?
Well, I guess I wanted to touch a bit on this whole idea of reparations again, because it's constantly brought up. It was brought up a lot in the debate as well. And
I don't get it.
I get it, but at the same time, I think so much time has passed that it's no longer a viable solution. Maybe at one point it would have been. And I think the people who call for reparations still, a lot of those Black folks feel that it wasn't truly given to them. And because it wasn't, that's why they're held down. And that's why they were never able to excel.
It's just bullshit and demands and narcissism and self-obsession.
So what do you think of reparations?
Reparations are ridiculous, honestly. Like, and you're right, it got brought up a lot during the debate. And the way that I look at it is because one of the things Rashad said that really struck a chord with me was when he said that Black people in America cannot move forward until reparations, until we get that. And to me, it's like, okay, well, that is ridiculous, because if you cannot move forward unless you get a paycheck, something is wrong. Yeah. Because you're not persevering. And sometimes we're not going to get what we want in life. Sometimes we're going to encounter situations that we might feel is just like, why is this happening to me? I think the most important thing is, how are we going to overcome these obstacles that we face?
Yeah.
And if you're too worried about, well, I didn't get a paycheck, what you're saying is you can't move forward, you can't get over it, you can't succeed without a paycheck. And that is a problem in itself.
Yeah, it also shits on all of the Black folks who have succeeded, have persevered. You know, one of the first people who came to mind was Eric July. I mean, he had a very successful crowd-funded campaign to launch his own comic book company and all that stuff, and literally carve his own niche outside of DC, outside of Marvel, outside of these establishment-controlled companies. And, you know, if he would have just sat back and said, well, I can't do it without their help, I'm going to have to go into into DC, into Marvel, find a job, be woke, curtail my beliefs so I can make it and get the paycheck. He never would have pushed and did that on his own.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you just can't wait around for people to save you.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and it gets back to the thing that you mentioned earlier, is that the leftists are obsessed with the past. They want to use the past as a cudgel in order to beat everyone into complying with whatever their agenda du jour is today. And, this is the thing that we see, like, every time they bring it up because they want to, it's emotionally manipulative, first of all. It's not an honest conversation. And this is the other thing that we see with the left. People on the right, they want to actually debate the ideas. They want to talk about the facts. They want to compare notes. And, if they're wrong about something, they want to be shown that so they can update their information. People on the left are like, I've been calling them like the lie people, or the people like who speak in lies. They want to be affirmed. They want to have everything that they already have in their heads validated, affirmed, coddled, whatever, so that and they will attack you if you don't do that, because that's how they communicate. We're looking at two fundamentally different types of operation in the world. One that is based upon the ability to independently, critically analyze information and draw your own conclusions, and another one that doesn't have that capability internally, and so they must glom onto a external thought system, and or whether it's true
label
or not,
that they put onto you, like, Gothix is the problematic grifter, like, how dare you be a minority, and like divert away from the way they
because
think.
your very existence assaults their inner narrative.
Do you know Adam Coleman?
Yeah,
we had him on the show twice
Love
as
Adam.
well. And one of the last things we talked about with him was this idea was, that he's blacking incorrectly. And this is basically what they act like, is like, if you don't align with this ideology, you're not blacking right. There's something that you're doing incorrect.
And Alexis, remember Saved for Myself? She's very popular on Instagram. We had her on the show. She's a mom who is, she's been told many times that she's not black enough, or that she's too white, which is like, things she called that colorism. And I was just like, fascinating.
She was talking about that sort of racism that came from her family and other peer groups who were black. Also partly because, she's in an interracial relationship. She married a white man, and he's into things that are more stereotypically black. So he would be accused of the opposite, that he wasn't being white enough, for listening to rap and that sort of thing. So it was interesting because they kind of ended up complimenting each other in that strange way. And I guess they found camaraderie in that.
Nice. Yeah, that's definitely something that I can relate to growing up, hearing you're not black enough, you're trying to act white, and it's so exhausting. But again, this is the long game of trying to socially engineer black people, or pretty much any demographic of people where they share some type of characteristic, trying to get people into this sort of a collective mindset. And it's so regressive, because if I ask people, they say, oh, you're betraying your race because you're pretending you're acting white or whatever. And if I ask them, okay, what is black to you? What is black culture? They can't give me an answer, because whatever they say is going to sound racist.
Yeah, they start regurgitating a bunch of stereotypes.
Yeah. And what is acting white as well?
Right.
What is that? Is it just not speaking in Ebonics? Like, does that mean you're acting white? If you like rock music or metal music and those sorts of things, is that white? I mean, I know bands that have black frontmen and black drummers and black
This is
guitarists.
all just horse hockey. It's all just artificially contrived BS and lies that leftists who are stuck in a broken narrative have to project onto the world in order to feel comfortable within themselves.
Yeah.
And this is like the problem that we, moderates, and I'm still identify as mostly liberal. Like there's a few things that I've gotten more conservative with over time, but I'll forever call myself a moderate or like a classical liberal. I'm not really conservative in a lot of ways, and I don't feel like I was pushed into that. You just feel that the left, Jordan, just kept going lefter, and then they just went off the cliff, and I'm like, I'm not following them.
Yeah. I mean,
over that edge.
That's been my experience as well. Although, and I'm a moderate as well, but I do now acknowledge more that I think I lean more right. I lean more conservative, and I'm willing to acknowledge that and not be afraid to say that. Although, there are still things, certain values that I hold that would be considered maybe a little more liberal, and I bring this up on the show often, and Jordan Peterson talks about this often, is both perspectives are needed, and you need them in this country to have a dialogue, to have a true society that isn't stagnant. If you're too far to the right and you want to just conserve traditions exactly as they are with no room for innovation or change, you get a sort of rigid society, and that's not good either. But go too far to the left, no boundaries.
It's not even so much a
morality out the window.
It's not even going too far to me. It's that people with personality disorders have to be just acknowledged as such and excised from the conversation. Like, if you're like Trump is like, he's a narcissist, like, and that blows my mind that we're not using that language more often, or when it does get used, it gets kind of histrionic, and then they start calling him a Hitler. But then on the other time, Joe Biden's like a friggin', I can't even say it here because YouTube, the Communist Party, will hit me.
Well, the reason why I brought up this, why you need both perspectives, is
but you need them to be not, infested with people who have personality disorders and conscience problems.
Personality disorders is another subject, and we definitely go into that and how the left is more ridden with those types. But ultimately, I'm talking about when Peterson talks about this, he talks about how people vote their temperament. You can look at someone's personality, like you can have them take the Big Five test, for example, and see like, oh, this person's higher in conscientiousness but lower in these traits, or this person's higher in openness to experience but lower in these traits, and you can guess pretty accurately whether or not they will vote more liberal or vote more conservative. And what it comes down to is conservatives they do tend to be more conscientious. They're better at running structures once those structures are already established and keeping things going the way they are. Whereas the liberal, they're more likely to innovate, to come up with the new ideas. They're the entrepreneur types, they're the creatives and the artists.
Yeah, well, but the point is you need both, but you need both to be psychologically healthy and stable, and not, cuckoo bananas town.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I agree.
Well, you're someone who's been on both sides, so it's just like, I think you understand it, and you strike me as a creative person, as someone who's a little more artistic in the way you dress and express yourself. So, and you don't see a lot of that on the right side,
Right, and I think that definitely needs to change. I don't know how it got this way. Like, as far as like the conversation not being dominated by one particular ideology, I definitely see how that is, like, if we're just talking about the left, like the media and the education system has done a really good job of sort of building this worldview that everything is liberalism, left-leaning, everything. Like, if you look at Hollywood, where it's like a political movie, who's usually the bad guy in these movies? It's usually people on the right, So as far as like the creativity goes and stuff, I wonder sometimes, because like I recently became a Christian, and I wonder if something has to do with people that believe in God, sort of, I think by default going over to the conservative side, and then maybe there is this hesitancy to explore new things in the creative realm because they're afraid of, like, you know what I mean? Like there's not enough flexibility there, whereas people on the left, they don't really believe in God, so they're just like, no rules, do whatever.
Yeah. No, I agree with you there, and I think more than anything, the problems happening in this country can very much be attributed to and I was talking to my friend about this last week, but there's a God-shaped hole in a lot of people's hearts, and they're trying to fill that hole with all these other things. And I guess in some ways it could be, their artistic pursuits, or it could be sex, or it could be drugs, or it could be a political ideology, or any of that. When I do think that there's a lack of spirituality, and I'm not even saying you have to come at the subject from a Christian perspective, but just a sense of spirituality at all, a sense of that there's a bigger, higher power, something that we are all sort of connected to, from which we come, from which we will go. And that lack, I think, is why the left has gone off the deep end and just latches on to all these other things. Whereas on the right, they have more of a unifying stability by that belief in God.
Yeah. They have a foundation, because like I can't even stop at saying a lack of spirituality, because I've met some people that worship crystals and rub sage on their body, and they are the nastiest individuals. So it's like they don't really have that foundation. And a lot of people who say I don't believe in God, they'll find a God out of something else. They'll worship a social justice movement and make that their God. And I think it sort of screams to like not having purpose either, because when you don't have purpose, you're gonna find your purpose in all of these cultural things, and it's not always good.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think there's also something to be said about the community and those sorts of things, the connections you make from attending church and that sort of thing. When I was younger, I attended church, and then, around 15, I stopped, and I was just like, I didn't fit in. Being gay and stuff also gives you a very complicated relationship with religion, and you tend to have that journey where you break away, and then some return, some never return. But I always held a sense of spirituality. I had a little brief atheist phase, but there was always something in me that knew there's a bigger, higher power that connects everything. And actually, I went to church again a couple weeks ago for the first time in years. It was a Lutheran mass too, which was interesting because I was raised Catholic, and they're basically the same. They're not really that different, aside from like the 2 extra lines in the Lord's Prayer.
What is a Lutheran? Educate me, because I just go to non-denominational. I consider myself a Christian.
Protestants. So yeah. I read about the Protestant Reformation and all that stuff, the schism in the church, and basically they try to go away from a lot of the trappings of the Catholic Church.
Basically, the difference between the Protestants and the Catholics is the Protestants don't think that the Catholics could write tickets to heaven. That was part of it, but that was the big.
There was a whole lot of grievances.
There was a lot of other things too.
Yeah, Martin Luther wrote a whole list, and he, nailed them.
And then I guess the Lutherans would be more of like his branch, right?
Yes, but ultimately, they felt the Catholic Church was too focused on like power and pomp and circumstance and like
ritual.
Yeah, ritual, and like they didn't think the Pope was like the intermediary between God and that sort of thing. They wanted
Pope to
go back to Scripture and that sort of stuff. Also, they made their churches less ornate and stuff. They started to go away from iconography. Although that's not totally true anymore. I mean, the church I was in had stained glass windows and that sort of thing. It's not as like gaudy looking, I guess, as some would say. Like Catholic
they don't got that. They don't got that Roman Catholic money. That's you want to talk about old money, girl. There's that Roman Catholic money.
I think whether you're Protestant or Catholic or non-denominational, like ultimately there's that foundation is what we're talking about here, and having that foundation is powerful. It's important. I was watching this video the other day on this channel called Inspiring Philosophy. I don't know if you've ever seen this guy. I might invite him on the show actually. And he had a video. It was called Is Christianity Harmful? Was the video. And he addressed some of the studies that are typically brought up by like secularists and atheists that try to link being secular atheists to being like less likely to commit crimes and to kill and things like that. And then he acknowledged how they cherry pick those few studies, but ignore all of these other studies that actually show that people who are more intrinsically religious actually have a less likely chance of committing crimes, of being addicted to drugs,
better outcomes.
They're calmer. They find more of a sense of peace in their lives and an orientation to go towards. And he acknowledges the difference between, like I said, intrinsic religiosity and extrinsic religiosity. And he found that the studies didn't really apply to the people who are extrinsically religious. And that
Do you want to explain what that? Yeah.
So extrinsic religiosity is basically the people who go to church more just because it's expected of them and it's their tradition. They go maybe for that sense of community.
So they like do religious displays.
Well, it's more just because it's part of their family tradition or something like that, or they like the sense of community and connecting with people. Whereas someone who's more intrinsically religious, it's about God. It's about practicing the religion as good as you can, and it's about actually following it, not so much just going for the sake of just going because that's what's expected of you. And the people who are more extrinsically religious, the studies didn't really show they had those benefits of, less drug addiction, less crime. But the people who are intrinsically religious, who went truly because they were devoting themselves to God and wanted to practice the religion as closely as they could, that's where you found those benefits. You found they did have less depression and less suicidality and things like that. And man, atheists will never acknowledge those studies.
They won't acknowledge it. And because I've made that argument many times and this is why, like, if we're just talking about like communism, this is why Karl Marx said in his book, he hates God. He wants to get rid of religion. Why is that? Like, why is that? And that's because people that have that foundation in those terms that you mentioned, because I forgot how you even said it. Intrinsic. All right. So people, I if I can say it in a layman's terms, I like to say fakers and actual believers, because there's a lot of people that will say, I'm Christian, but then they'll cherry pick what they believe in the Bible, like a salad bar. Like, I don't like this, I like this. And it's more of like a display of ritual than actually having that relationship with God. And this is where a lot of atheists will say, well, Hitler was a Christian. No, that's someone calling themselves a Christian. There's a big difference. But yeah, that's totally, I have to check this channel out. It sounds very interesting, but I totally agree with that.
Inspiring Philosophy, it's called. Yeah, he has these great little short videos too, where he responds to people on TikTok who make these like typical claims and they never back them up with data. Like Christmas was just a pagan holiday, or Thanksgiving is inherently racist, and then he'll actually address those things. Or like the New Agers, he comes for them a lot as well, and which I sympathize with because I've been coming for them for years. But all right, so now that we're on this topic of religion, I think it's a good lead-in as well to the recent decision regarding Roe v. Wade and the subject of abortion. And we know that you can't really separate this debate from religion. I personally think it's impossible, because most of the people who are on the pro-life side, I think it's safe to say, are probably religiously oriented, and most of the people who are on the, we'll say, pro-choice side, although they don't use that terminology anymore, do they? They use pro-abortion, are not religiously oriented typically. What are your thoughts about kicking this decision back to the states?
I guess that's I think it's a good start. For me, I used to be pro-abortion, and then I gradually started to shift my worldview to, abortion's bad, but I wouldn't get it. Yeah. And then eventually I ended up at being like, no, this is terrible. But that was before I ever became a Christian too. And I think that it is possible to separate the two. And I think by default, a lot of people on the left, they want to use that as part of their argument because they don't have an argument. Yeah. They want to be able to blame this on your belief system, to discredit anything that you say. So I think it's good that they put it back to the states. But I mean, I like to say that if I have the capability to wave a magic wand and change the way America is, I would just get rid of abortion. And I know that people will say, well, what about this and rape and all these things? This is my perspective on it, is if you are responsible to have sex, you are responsible to have a child. And I don't look at having a child as a consequence. I look at it as like the fruit or the result of, I think if we as humans have the capacity to procreate, we should procreate anyway, because if we don't, we would civilization would die.
Yes. Yeah. So on our last episode that you were on with us, we went into depth about this topic, and you talked about your journey and how your views changed over time. So for anyone's interested in that, go back to that first episode with Gothix. She kind of went into depth about that. But one of the things you said in that episode, which was probably the most controversial thing in that whole episode, was that your journey took you eventually to the point where you just started to say outright that you think abortion is murder.
Yeah.
And I did a poll on this on my Instagram a couple weeks ago. I did 2 polls, actually. The first was, is abortion murder? And, most people answered no, I think, but it was very close. And then I reframed the question to, is abortion killing a life? Which more people answered yes to. And I felt like a lot of people who were answering no thought it was killing still, but were hung up on the legal implications of the term murder. So I kind of wanted to address that to you, because technically, in certain states, it's not illegal, right, to have an abortion. So to use the word murder and the legal implications of that would not technically apply. But you just outright use that word. So why, maybe go into that again for our viewers, like why you just decided to just say like, this is murder, like, because that's an extreme position to many.
So look at it this way. If there was a woman that was 9 months pregnant, she got stabbed to death, how would they view that in the court of law? In a lot of cases, they say that's a double homicide, because they're counting the baby.
Some people brought that up too in the comments as well. In response to the other people who were bringing up the legal implications of murder, there's a contradiction there. Yeah,
it is. So I don't think that murder, the way that it seems like people are trying to take this term and make it situational. Well, the intention is not to murder. The intention is to give a woman the right to choose. It's okay. So I don't think that that's consistent. It's just not consistent to me.
Yeah. It's a rationalization, really, is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
If you, frankly, I agree with you. Like at a certain point, the thing about saying abortion is murder, it's almost like an argument that we should outlaw all forms of it nationwide. And I think that's really that's what they're afraid of, right? This is like the thing that Lindsey Graham said he wanted to do, which helped rile the Democratic base. It's one of the reasons why a lot of the young people got out and voted in the midterms. They're on this, like, the Republicans want to make abortion illegal. And yeah, well, maybe a lot of them do. And maybe we should have that honest conversation about why, because
there's a pushback.
I mean, if you're killing a human life, that's murder regardless of the circumstances. Sometimes we say it's what's it called, a manslaughter, when it's an accident. If it was an accidental abortion, something happened, manslaughter. But like, this is the thing that they're afraid of. They don't want women to go, we don't want to lock up women who have miscarriages, but at the same time, we don't want abortion to be institutionalized. It is institutionalized murder when you look at it. It's an industry. They sell the parts of the fetus to pharmaceutical companies and scientific firms for research. These are very rare, very high demand materials, research grade materials, stem cells, all kinds of things they can only get from aborted fetuses.
They also don't want to acknowledge
have that conversation.
They don't want to acknowledge that a lot of the pushback now against abortion is coming because their rhetoric has shifted as well. And I brought up Adam Coleman earlier, and he wrote a really good article before the elections happened about why, as a moderate, he was voting Republican for the first time. And he brought up a lot of points in it, all of which I agreed with, I would say. And one of the points he brought up there was how the rhetoric around abortion has shifted from pro-choice to pro-abortion, which is a totally different way of seeing it. And I've even seen people on Twitter, a lot of these lefty types, put pro-abortion in their bios.
It was supposed to be like safe, legal, and rare. And now it's just like, get abortions anytime, as many as you want.
That's the problem.
Glorifying it
is this culture of encouraging it, where if you were, back in the day when you were pro-choice, a lot of the people who identified as pro-choice would still not be the types who would like still encourage it. They would say, hey, I don't like abortion, but I also don't want the government to be involved in a woman's body. It's not that anymore. A lot of the rhetoric is becoming, well, just no matter what, you always have this right to do it no matter what. And I am pro-abortion. It's not about being
It's like a sacrament to some of these people. It's disturbing.
Yeah, it is really disturbing, and you're right. It's people are celebrating it now, and as you said, the rhetoric has changed for so long. How often did we hear men don't have a say in this, but now we can't even define what a woman or a man is. So technically, you guys are equally as included in this conversation, and it's scary because. Like in Rhode Island, you can abort up to 9 months. So there's a lot of states that are doing this. That's disgusting to me. And the scary thing is like that in conjunction with, okay, if we look at society and how they're promoting promiscuity and hookup culture and everything, you can see how the cycle of abortion will keep happening because we have the tools available to us to not even have the abortion conversation. It's called close your legs and be a little bit more particular about who you want to have sex with, but nobody wants to do that. So now we have that. And then if you think about all of these social justice activists when they're screaming and yelling and calling everyone, the word I won't say on YouTube, I don't want to get you banned, calling all of these words, right? What do? They justify acts of violence because those are the bad guys. And you're justifying an act of violence again, the most innocent being that cannot defend themselves. To me, that looks like a recipe for disaster. Like we're moving towards a society where a woman has a choice to do whatever she wants with her body. 9 months, fine. Even after it comes out, I think there's, I forgot what state it was that that's okay now. Is it Virginia?
It came up in Virginia in a law, and then it got shot down. But I think it might be California where they actually passed the perinatal abortion concept, where you could actually put the baby down up to like it was 2 weeks or something after the birth of the baby if the mother's mental health was in question. I'm like, why wouldn't you just give it up for adoption? There's so many people looking for babies like that to be adopted.
You see, the Overton window is shifting, so they're trying to make things more socially acceptable little by little by little, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see what the end game for that is.
Yeah. So on my Twitter poll, there was someone who actually responded, explaining their answer, and they compared a fetus to a parasite. And yes, that was my reaction too.
Right.
I was just thinking, like, what kind of mind, what kind of person could even make that comparison? For one, they were really serious about this argument.
So first of all, probably just a little armchair psychology. Probably somebody who's damaged heavily by their parents.
Probably, but like they even like sent me like an article or a study or something that was like comparing parasites and how they behave to a fetus and how it behaves. Totally, and he was adamant like they were the same thing, and I'm like, no, they're not. I brought up the definition of parasite, and
different species.
It's a different species that's latched onto another and feeding off of it. But his whole argument was that they can't survive on their own. They have to feed off of the mother and use her body. But I'm like, dude, even when a baby leaves the womb, humans, the way we develop for many, many years after leaving the womb, we are completely dependent upon our parents still to feed us and take care of us for years, right? After that. So I'm just like, based on your logic, you could be arguing to like that you could kill a child years after they're, out of the womb because they're still attached to the parent and need them to eat and feed and all these other things. I'm like, you sound nuts right now. So
I had someone call up my live stream the other day and tell me that they were trying to argue against abortion to their college roommate because their roommate suggested that a baby is not a human life until it's able to form a human connection with someone.
What does that even mean? Like,
I have no idea. But I made the joke, like, I guess I'm not a human, like, throughout high school, 'cause I wasn't connecting with nobody.
Right? I was so misanthropic in my teenage years.
Yeah, it's just, I wish the people who were just gung-ho about abortion would at least just be honest about it. And maybe they don't have to say it's murder, but at least say it is killing. You are killing a life. And if they were more honest about it, I think I would respect their positions a little more.
That's what we see with these people consistently. They lie about everything.
Like, it's just a clump of cells.
It's constant
What?
equivocation. It's a constant rationale, reasoning, misrepresentation. And, you know, this happens on both sides of the aisle, but predominantly we're seeing a lot of this from leftists in the dialogue, in the culture when it comes to these hot button issues these days. Like, they can't even admit that the abortion thing just kicked the deal back to the states. And, you know, right now, as it stands, there's some states where abortion is being enshrined in their constitutions. Yeah. And there are some states where it was automatically made illegal. And that's just, you know,
I think a lot of them are just dumb. They don't even totally understand what that decision entailed.
Yeah, a lot of low information.
They just think like, oh, it's going to be banned everywhere.
And you'll know, we still don't know who leaked that decision early. That was a conversation that, you know, we're going to get to the bottom of this, and then it got tabled, and now it's quietly just not. Nobody, like, they'll probably never release it because there seems to be some two-party agreement going on here. So it makes me wonder, you know, was it a conservative that leaked it, or was it a Democrat? We don't really know.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Could have been either. Do you want to move on to your other little topic here?
Yeah, so one of the other things that I really wanted to chat with you about was your recent video on YouTube about quitting weed, quitting cannabis. And, you know, all the different reasons you talked about, which I found resonated with me because I have also recently quit cannabis. This Thursday, I think, will be 7 weeks off of it. And I feel good about my decision. I don't miss it. And I found, you know, my reasons were very similar to yours. Also, you posted something recently today. Apparently, they put an age limit on that video, correct?
Yes.
You marked that as, you know.
What?
And, you know, you said, YouTube, would you kindly ask your review team what they're smoking? I'm assuming someone at the office is either high or stupid or suggesting a video about quitting weed isn't suitable for teenagers. Are you suggesting that kids should be stoned out of their minds? So I thought that was interesting as well. But, you know, talk about that video and maybe what led you up to deciding to make that video and some of the things you said in that video, like your reasons why you felt you needed to let this go.
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting because when I was in high school, I actually did not like weed because I saw what it was doing to a lot of my friends where they were just like becoming these zombies, like just zoinked out of their mind. And it wasn't until I got into the workforce and I started working stressful jobs like customer service that I started to say, you know what, I'm going to try a little bit of weed because I heard that it can help with stress and everything. And as I got older, I kept in putting more of that into my diet, like especially when I became a content creator, I was still working full time at customer service jobs. So I was like, okay, now I need more weed because I'm getting even more stressed out. I got to deal with the internet and I got to deal with these angry phone calls. And I realized that I think it was maybe like the beginning of this year, I got super depressed. But I mean, depression I had always dealt with throughout my life, but I think something about just like the political environment that we're in, the Great Reset, New World Order, all that stuff. I started to feel very depressed and anxious, and I was like, okay, how do I fix this? So I just kept numbing with that, and as well as trying to go to therapy, antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, which is a totally different conversation, but it kind of ties into this whole I was just numbing stuff instead of actually dealing with the problem. It honestly, the true answer of why I was able to even quit was God, because if I didn't,
I was going to ask you that if your, you know, your faith and your newfound, you know, interest in Christianity and stuff had anything to do with it.
Yeah, it definitely spearheaded it. So for context, back in January, my church that I had just started going to the month before, they were doing like a 21-day prayer and fasting cleanse. And I was not a believer at that point. I just said, let me go to church and see what this is about.
Okay.
And I said, okay, 21 days of praying and getting rid of something that I shouldn't be consuming too much. So I said, okay, coffee, social media, and weed. Got that out of my diet. At the end of the month, I felt like $1 million. I was like, wow, this is so great. This is awesome. And then a few months later, I gave my life over to Christ. I fully committed. And I was like, this is awesome. And then shortly after that, I started putting weed back into my diet. And it was like, I I have friends that smoke weed, so they'd come over, hey, do you want an edible? And then I would try to justify it in my mind, like, oh, it's the weekend, I'm just gonna have one edible, and next thing I know, I'm fully back on weed, and I'm like, what the hell happened? So it took me another conversation of me praying to God, saying, I really want to get this out of my diet. Can you please help me? Because I have trouble like fighting off this temptation. And it's after that I was like, I'm good. I don't have the desire for it. I can drive past the dispensary and not feel like I have to do a quick detour anymore. Like it's just gone. But yeah, that was like I said, my main reason was I was using that as a crutch for so long. And I think in a lot of cases it made me complacent with issues that were going on in my life instead of facing those issues and saying, okay, how do I actually address these things?
So I had quit once before. I think this was around 2017, 2018. I quit for 2.5 years. I went cold turkey. And I remember, I think it was on like Christmas or Christmas Eve. I was smoking with some friends. I think Brent was there. And I was just like, yeah, I think I'm going to stop this for a while. And I just went cold turkey. And the first couple weeks are always the hardest. There's definitely like some irritability and things like that. And I don't want to say it's the same as like withdrawal that people go through, like from alcoholism or heroin or something like that. But there's definitely a irritability and a change in you for a bit before you readapt to just being sober all the time. So I stopped for 2.5 years, and then I started again. And I thought, all right, this time it'll be different. My relationship with it will be different. I'll have more control of it. I won't do it all the time. I'll only do it on occasions. And it was good for a bit, here and there. And then I just started to slowly fall back into my old habits of, anytime it was around, I would do it. Anytime it was a social situation, it's like, yeah, this is what we do to bond and all that stuff. And then I did start to realize this year that, much like you, this was a coping mechanism now, a crutch. That's something that I was using to numb or to avoid facing certain issues in myself, in my life, in my upbringing. And just to not have to think about it or to just escape into that. And then one of the things you also brought up was about like content creation, like you started to feel like you need it to get stoned before you would like work on your videos or do a new video and that sort of thing. And it's the same thing for me. Like I would start to feel like, oh, I need this to be creative. I need this to paint. I need this. And when you don't, and I think when you start to get to that point where you're relying on it to be creative, that's bad. Like, how creative are you really if you need to ingest a substance in order to work, right? In order to produce something. So that was one of my reasons as well that I felt resonated with me when you talked about it. But I can see how this, the religious thing is one of the main reasons that you quit. Like I mentioned earlier, that God-shaped hole that a lot of people have in their lives, and we're trying to fill it with all these other things, right? Instead of just facing that reality that there's maybe a deeper foundation that we can find without relying on any substance at all. Whether it's pot or food or games or sex or whatever it is. And, and those studies that found like people who had that intrinsic religiosity were less likely to be addicted to drugs, were less likely to be depressed, were less likely to turn to things like that to deal with their problems.
Yeah.
So, your video really resonated with me. And it's funny because like I felt like it happened at a time when I like needed to see it, because I've been going through that recently, and having quit recently, I was just like, whoa, it's like divine intervention. I'm about to talk to Gothix, and whoa, this video about this very thing that I'm going through right now. So maybe Brent can give an alternative perspective here as someone who still smokes.
Look at him. He's just beaming right now.
I will never stop smoking.
Really?
I may take breaks from time to time, but it will always be a recurring feature of my existence. It's the same.
How do you know that?
How do you know that? Because I feel like I used to say that too.
It's myself. Possible. It may, it may not be. And I'd be fine with that too. I go through periods where, when I was working this job that I had recently, I was going, all day, no problem, not smoking. But then as soon as I got home, I was like, okay, need to relax, gonna do that. As it helps me unwind in the evenings.
But do you need it to unwind?
No, I don't need it, but I prefer it. It is my preferred, short, quick slip into dissociative relaxation.
I guess my next question would be, do you feel like in any way you're avoiding facing certain things about yourself, perhaps? That,
I mean, aren't we all just avoiding, something,
typical evasive answer.
Well, I'm just saying, I mean, sure, there probably are things that I'm avoiding dealing with, but is the weed really that, is that the obstacle for me to deal? No, I don't think so. I don't think I have the same response to substances that a lot of people do. I have no problem. Like, I don't really get what I would call addicted. Like, I can just pick it up and put it down.
I feel like we all tell ourselves that, though.
I have to agree. Like, I don't know. I think, because you said you needed to, like, well, you prefer it to unwind and relax, but wouldn't it feel better if you were able to do that without having to consume weed?
It would feel better if there weren't an external stimulus that drives me insane because I'm thrust into a situation.
Maybe that's it, though. Maybe you need another way of how to deal with those things so that they don't become a burden.
So in this situation, I was sort of smoking on the end of it in order to unwind, but it didn't impede in my ability to realize this is a toxic situation. I can't, keep up this pattern of behavior over long periods of time. I need to GTFO. And so I don't think the weed really, interfered with that. I think it was more, I've just matured to the point now where I can see toxic situations, especially work environments or professional environments, where the red flags come hot and heavy early. It's like, okay, get out.
Well, sure. But do you think maybe it could be impeding in other things, maybe preventing you from putting that time and energy and focus in other things? Like, one of the things for me, another reason why I quit was I just found, and I never stopped reading when I was smoking, but I do more reading when I'm not smoking. And I comprehend and remember what I'm reading more. But a lot of it too is just like being able to focus on one task at hand at a time. And one of the issues that I was personally having was pot made it harder for me to do that. I would end up juggling different things instead of just being like, all right, I'm going to do this.
But is that marijuana's fault, Daniel? Or is that your natural tendency to juggle a lot of things? Let's just look at your tabs for right now.
But
he's got umpteen million tabs, whereas I've got like a dozen.
Okay, I'm not saying that has nothing to do with my personality.
You think the weed made it worse?
Of course it did, because I'm 7 weeks off of it, and I can tell you from that experience that it's been much easier for me to focus on each task at hand and to complete that before I move on to the next thing, instead of allowing my mind to like juggle all the different things that I have to do, and then I end up not getting a lot of them done, and then I just freak out, I get more anxiety, that sort of thing. I wanted to bring up a Bible verse because I thought it was a fascinating one, and you brought it up in your video. I think you referenced it at some point, and it was 1 Corinthians 6:12, and it was, all things are permitted for me, but not all things are beneficial. All things are permitted for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. There are different translations of this verse. Sometimes I think they use the word law or lawful.
There's so many good little gems in the Bible. Like, people really just like talk about smack about the Bible because it's the Bible, but there's so many little gems that are just like beautiful, rhetorical, compact and bits of knowledge.
So the International Standard Version is, everything is permissible for me, but not everything is helpful. Everything is permissible for me, but I will not allow anything to control me. And I think that really speaks to the issue here. It's like, yes, we can do this. We can ingest this substance. Maybe it's even helpful in certain periods to an extent. But when it gets to a point where it's every day and it's like controlling you almost, and it's your master now.
It's a compulsion.
Yes. And so I think that switched to just being like, well, no one is my master but God.
Yeah.
It makes it much easier to let those things go.
I could totally grok an addiction being sort of unholy, for lack of a better term. From the idolatry standpoint, you're sort of putting something
on a pedestal
before God, becoming obsessed with it. So yeah, I could definitely see that.
Yeah, and
one of the things that before I even started contemplating this journey with God One of the things that I remember talking to my friend about, because he asked, like, okay, you're depressed. What are you doing to help with your depression? I said, I've tried everything. I would always find myself saying that. I've tried everything in the sense of antidepressants, weed, therapy, new age, juju, whatever. and and in retrospect, I didn't try everything because that conversation about God, I was like, don't wanna do it.
Yeah.
So
Sort of
yeah,
ruled it out without trying it.
yeah, and exactly. And there was another scripture I think goes really hand in hand with the one that you just read. I forgot what verse it is, but it says something to the effect of, "Be sober minded and be watchful, because your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." Because if you think of how someone acts when their mind is clouded by weed or their mind is clouded by alcohol, there's a chance that they could get swept up in doing something that is bad, right? Like, you're not going to get behind a wheel and drive if you're drunk for obvious reasons.
Yeah, it makes it easier for you to make, I guess, stupid decisions. What I will say though is, like, I'm not going to say there's no value in altered states of consciousness, even in being drunk from alcohol. I think there are certain things we can learn about how we perceive things by being able to alter the consciousness and know the difference between that and the difference between being sober all the time and viewing things that way. And yeah, pot helps with creativity. It might make you think in a different way or look at something in a different way where you might not normally have done so. The problem is when, like I said earlier, you rely on it to get that creative perspective, and you don't realize when maybe you've gleaned everything you need to glean from the experience at that. You've already, like, all right, is there any other way to look at the situation while using pot? Probably not. Like, I've used it to the point of excess now, and there's probably no need to do that anymore. Like, I've taken mushrooms a couple times, and I remember the last experience I had, which was years ago. It was an intense experience, and me and my friend, by the end of it, there was this sort of I had this like sort of feeling like, I don't think I need to do this again. Kind of like, I think I've learned what I want to learn about this state of consciousness, and like, I'm fine with that now. I don't think I need to experiment or explore that.
That happened to me
again.
after my 5th acid trip. That's also interesting story. A really intense acid experience is one of the reasons why I know God exists, or what we call God exists, as a real practical extra spatial dimensional force.
Yeah. But my problem with that whole thing is that, like, there are a lot of people, especially in the New Age movement, where they start to develop this idea that the only way to, like, peer into the spirit realm or to get that insight into the bigger picture is through the drug. And
you can meditate,
but that's what I mean. It's like, it's almost like a shortcut. It's almost like cheating. And I think for some people, they're like, their brains probably aren't even ready for that, to peer beyond the realm and to look at things in that sort of plastic, flexible way. And there's also, like, people, if you have like a predisposition to schizophrenia and things like that, it could exacerbate that, or activate that epigenetic predisposition in the person. And even weed can do this, an excessive amount,
especially edibles. Edibles have extremely psychotropic effects, and newbies, people that don't, young people, they think that, oh, I'll just eat an edible, no big deal, and you take 100 milligrams edible as somebody who doesn't, regularly smoke, you are getting blasted for a while. And if you have a propensity for, emotional issues, like, all that's going to come up.
It probably will. Yeah.
It's not for everyone. And this is the thing, I think, with weed and addiction in general. We all have sort of like what I think of our life lesson plans, and there are different lessons thrown into the mix. And for some of us, we have to learn how to disengage from a substance. We have to learn how to manage a substance, or we have to learn how to completely avoid a substance altogether, because its impact on us is so negative. And that varies across, drugs and food and all kinds of things. And I think each of us has a different palette of lessons. And right now, I don't think me quitting weed is super big priority in my overall lesson plan.
Yes, but you also said you never would. And I think that that kind of definitive statement is perhaps a little dishonest with yourself, because you don't know that. You don't know what you're going to be like 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So to be that like sure, like I'm never quitting this, I don't know, I wouldn't be so sure.
Well, some future version of me that is not the current version of me may change his perspective on the issue. Yes.
Okay, so it's not never, right?
Well, it's never for right now.
It's never for right now.
You know, my thinking may evolve.
Well, look, disclaimer, and you know, Gothix gave a disclaimer in her video as well. We're not over here preaching to people saying like this is what you should do or you shouldn't do. You know, we're simply sharing our experiences. You know, and
it's fun. I think it's helpful also to play with the ideas, to give different perspectives, to have a conversation, because I think it gives people different ways to think about things that they don't necessarily. You know, maybe we're exposing some potheads to some reasons they need to slow things down.
Yeah, well, but they don't want to acknowledge that. And this is the thing, Gothix, also you brought up in your video, is there is a dishonesty around the conversation with pot. And I was like this too.
There's just dishonesty around all the conversations.
Yes, but I'm talking about pot. I'm talking about cannabis right now. And I was like this too when I was younger, where you just kind of, oh, it's medicinal, it helps with this, it helps with that. And there's this sort of avoidance of acknowledging that there are any negative consequences to this at all. And you talked about this in your video. So, you know, discuss that a bit. Like, you know, some of the backlash that you get from people who try to, I guess, maybe justify it or just sweep that stuff under the rug.
Yeah, I think that to me, if you're willing to sweep the side effects of consuming cannabis under the rug, that just sounds like a drug addict trying to just hold on to their drug. Like, don't get in between me and my weed. And I used to be the exact same way. I totally get it. But the argument that I give is, if I were to walk into a dispensary and say, what do you have for me that's going to help me sleep? It's going to help me with depression and stress. Rest assured, 100% of the time, I'm going to walk out with something. Someone's going to give me some type of product, but they're never going to tell me, hey, by the way, this could happen if you take this. This is a side effect. Because often I'll hear from people and say, well, because with that video in particular, a lot of people overlooked the part where I said, don't preach to me about why you smoke. Do you? You know what I mean? They overlooked that part. And the most common response that I was getting was, weed doesn't affect everyone in the same way. You are absolutely right, which is why the label that I read where it says limited information about the side effects of cannabis is unknown. That needs to be talked about more. So if there's limited information about the side effect, then why are we only talking about the benefits that we may or may not even experience equally? It's money. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a huge problem with informed consent across the board in the country, especially when it comes to weed, but also when it comes to very recent controversial medical interventions that were hoisted upon us by, medical authorities, need I say no more.
As well as puberty blockers, processed hormones, and those sorts of things. It's the same thing. It's like there's this, the people who push that stuff and are really adamant about it and look, all these benefits, and it's, it's helping these trans kids not kill themselves and stuff. They refuse to acknowledge any negative.
Yeah, all of these weed dispensaries should have big signs up that say, may cause schizophrenia or schizophrenic-like episodes in some people, because if you go in there thinking, oh, it's safe, it's legal, I'm just going to get a little edible, it'll be fine. And you get too much, you're inexperienced, you don't know what you're doing. Maybe they oversell you. Maybe the person you're talking to behind the counter is a pothead, and so their tolerance is way higher. Any of these things could happen. We need to have informed consent.
Yeah, well, this is the thing, though. It's like one of the things they'll acknowledge, and I acknowledge this too all the time, is that like consumption-wise, when it comes to like overdosing, yeah, it's safe. People don't overdose on pot. And that's typically what they're going to respond to you with, like, oh, it's not dangerous.
Generally,
I can consume a lot of this and I'll just get really hungry and sleepy. And that's true. In that respect, yes, it is not as dangerous as alcohol. Alcohol, it's much easier to overdose on that and to actually die from consuming too much. Cannabis, I think like you would have to ingest something like 3 times your body weight or something.
No, toxicologically, you can't actually poison yourself. But what you can do is eat a little too much, have a bad psychological reaction
episode,
and, hurt yourself. yourself or, permanently damage your mental health, down the line.
Well, because, avoiding dealing with other issues and things that are going on with you. Like Gothix said, it's that numbing, that escapism. And yes, there are many things you can turn to for that. People turn to all sorts of things, video games, food, and sex, and there's all forms of
I love all those things.
Yeah, but to not acknowledge that pot is also a form of that, from people who are big advocates of it, it's a dishonest conversation.
And then there's the problem too about having honest conversation about marijuana and schizophrenia or other problems is that you've got the legalization crowd being like, oh, shush, you're giving the conservatives, the people that want to keep it illegal, talking points. No, we're just having an honest conversation. Like, we have to, step away from this, like, you're letting the other side score points. I'm being honest, because to really have true progress, we have to have everybody on the same page with accurate information. And really, that's what the psychopaths in charge don't want. And that's why they censor conversations. That's why they avoid, they have all their major media pump out nonstop lies.
Right, I'm going to get conspiratorial with Brent now a little bit. Do you think that, those elites in some way might want to push more pot onto our society, more cannabis use?
Absolutely,
because it makes people
absolutely 100%
maybe more complacent, maybe less likely to fight the system, less likely to to stand up and speak their minds, because they just figure, what the hell, I'm gonna just relax right now and put this Netflix show on and get high.
Totally, I agree 100%. Yeah, it's also a money-making thing. There's it's a burgeoning industry. It's very hot right now. There's a lot of people that are able, if you have the connections in your state, the moment that it becomes legal, you are primed in an excellent business position to turn, $1 million investment into $100 million business.
And to clear the record, I do acknowledge the medicinal uses for it in a lot of different cases. And there are definitely
that was the other, that's a huge thing that we've, for years and years and years, the medicinal benefits of marijuana have been maligned, ignored. Yeah. And now we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing this transition where they're being oversold, overemphasized. And now
how many people are really using it to, deal with like their Parkinson's,
schizophrenia, or not schizophrenia. There's seizure disorders,
epilepsy.
Crohn's disease. I know people who've had Crohn's disease where it's helped them as well.
HIV related wasting. People that have trouble keeping on weight.
Appetite,
very rare.
All right, so that's one of the other things I'm going to bring up. I guess that's my final point of why I stopped smoking was I felt I was relying on it too much to increase my appetite, and I've been trying to gain more weight. I've been working out, and I've always had trouble eating enough. And I found that, when my mood is crappy and I'm in a bad mood, I would lose my appetite. And I started to rely on pot to mitigate that in some way, not realizing that the pot was it was preventing me from addressing the roots of the depression, which were actually preventing me from increasing my appetite. So
vicious cycle.
In a sense, it actually wasn't helping with my appetite. It was sort of just helping in that temporary fix, but not in a long-term fix. And over the last 7 weeks, I've held my weight up, actually. I've actually been able to eat normally, maybe even a little better than when I was smoking. So that was just this lie that I was telling myself that I needed it to increase my appetite. It wasn't what I needed at all,
Yeah, that's interesting, because when I was depressed, I would smoke weed, and I also didn't have an appetite. And like, you can even tell, like, in my earlier videos, I weighed a lot less. And you can tell on my face, but like the difference is back then I was relying on weed to help me gain an appetite, but it actually wasn't even working for me. Whereas now I'm off weed and I'm just like, I like food again. It's weird.
Well, it is weird. People react differently to stress and depression. Like, they're the people who have the opposite issue. They stress eat. Yes. When they're feeling down, they turn to food. Their appetite, I guess, goes up, and they consume to get that comfort. Whereas I always had the opposite problem. Like, it would tank my appetite. It would go away. And now, I'm finding that's not so much the case anymore. And, I've been depressed a bit over the last week here and there, and I'm still eating, and it's something in me has changed, I guess. And I don't know if it's because the pot is gone, I'm not relying on that anymore. And now I'm actually dealing with the roots of that depression. So I'm not like falling back on this like lie that, oh, you know, I have to feel good to eat. Like that's bullshit. But also, you know, maybe my returning to God a little more, which I never totally let go, but I feel like over the last month or two, I've definitely developed a closer relationship with God in a way that I haven't before. And I'm realizing like that foundation is definitely a much healthier, better foundation for me to fall back on than a substance.
Totally. I agree. I think that's a good point to wrap it up.
Yes. Wait, how long did we go?
Oh, hour and 24 minutes.
About an hour and 24 minutes. Do you have any final thoughts on this subject? And maybe like, has there been any, you know, people who pushed back against you in your personal life?
I
like,
assume Gothix gets, you get pushback in everything you do. It's so controversial. It inspires so much backlash. I think this is like your third cancellation, your fourth, something.
I've lost track. I don't even count anymore. I'm just like, I can just breathe and they'll be like, what did you say? So
what are you doing now?
Literally. No, I mean, it's like, I like to take what Jordan Peterson says: in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. You know, I do not intend to upset anyone with anything that comes out of my mouth. But if that means that your offense could spark some type of dialogue, I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to participate in that, because that's how we grow as a society. That's how we learn. That's how we challenge our own ideas. And I think that, you know, people just got to be more comfortable having difficult conversations and not being so caught up on how it hurts my feelings. Because again, that could just be shutting people down and canceling and all that stuff. That to me tells, I think, paints a bigger picture at how much people lack emotional resilience, where they can't even entertain an opposing opinion without saying, I don't want to hear this. That should be a reflection on you.
Yeah. That's been something I've noticed in my in clients. I've had difficult nannying experiences where clients were just behaving in the most inappropriate, outlandish ways, you know, mostly across all ages, but mostly younger kids. And what stands out for me is that that's this tendency to be so fragile, to not be able to hear the word no, or, you know, to be told this is the way that the evening is going to proceed. You can comply, or there will be consequences for your misbehavior.
Zuby had a great tweet a couple days ago. I think he's on a little Twitter break right now, which I should do and take a leave from that. But he tweeted, not being able to maintain basic politeness and civility when faced with disagreement is a sign of immaturity.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
100%. And you see it because with these people, they get, when they're confronted with these perspectives that they can't handle, they don't want to argue with, they just want to shut down, they have very childlike reactions. Yeah. And this is something that I saw firsthand when I went up to Vermont to do this protest in Burlington with Fred Sargent and the Disaffected podcast. And these kids would, you know, make noise, block signs, you know, they didn't want to have a dialogue. They just wanted to have these really immature, really pathetic reactions that are just what you would expect from small children. And here you're seeing the behavior from adults and you're like, oh, our problem is so much more deeper than we realized culturally. We've got a bunch of, you know, physically they're adults, but psychologically and emotionally they're stunted at like early teenage levels.
Maybe less.
Could possibly even less.
What you just said, there's this technique called I think it's called the bite technique, and it's pretty much a way to recruit people into a cult, and there's different stages of it. And one of the stages talks about trying to control their emotions and their ability to think. And some of the tactics that people use is try to encourage reacting with noise or repeating slogans, because when you do that, you block out an opportunity for you to think rationally about something. If all you're doing is just like, meh, you're not thinking.
Like this, you know, it's like plugging your ears, like la 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 la, can't hear you.
Yep.
It's basically like that. Yeah.
So immature.
Yeah, well, there was a recent protest, a women's rights protest, I guess.
I'm so miffed I missed it.
Sex-based rights.
It was here in New York, down at City Hall. Kelly Jean Kay, aka Parker Posey Parker.
Yeah,
she was here to with a bunch of other women.
Yeah,
they were
Libby Edmonds, like she was supposed to speak, and Libby didn't even get to speak because of the interruptions that happened. But you know, these counter protesters showed up, and some of them just took their shirts off and had their tits out and stuff, and just like screaming, making noise, like, you know, the
vitriol, vulgar, you know, the filth that was just being ejected from. It was both too. There was one, I saw at least one trans woman and one trans man.
But it reminded me of a temper tantrum. You know,
Yes.
when I see that sort of behavior, like you can go there and just hold your sign up and just be like, this is my point of view. But when you're there and you're screaming in this sort of way and you're trying to silence the other side or to block them with your flags to make sure no one can see them, one, it's the cycle of insanity you talked about. You're actually attracting more attention to them.
Streisand effect.
Two, it's just it's childish. You're not actually getting your point across and saying, here's what I stand for. You're throwing a temper tantrum and saying, why am I not getting my way? How dare you not agree with us? And that's what it looks like from these lefties. You know, it looks like kids throwing themselves on the ground and flailing their arms around and throwing a temper tantrum.
Very, very concerning.
Do you have are there any events coming up? Are you doing any more live things that you can let people know about?
Or is on the Gothix agenda?
I don't have anything on my agenda, honestly. I haven't been uploading as much because I'm just like, I feel like I'm just repeating everything. Like, the world is going to shit. People are crazy. That just is what it is. We all know this. But yeah, I mean,
like, just bring on the giant rocks, man.
Seriously, it's like, I'm ready. You know, gothixtv. You can find me on YouTube and Twitter, assuming YouTube doesn't get sick of me putting out. I don't know what they're looking for.
We got our second strike for some old content. I went through our back catalog and nuked like 90% of our stuff because I didn't want to risk, you know,
a third strike
and having the channel get completely deleted.
Yeah.
So
and that would be
everything's already it's backed up on, you know, Rumble and Odyssey and stuff. But
it would be a bummer because
folks are wondering where our old content went. It's on Rumble and Odyssey.
It's a bummer though because we lost most of our views because we had to delete a lot of that stuff. And it would definitely be a bummer though if the channel got nuked. Like, we just passed 1,000 subs and it took like a year and a half to even get there. So we're just like, but if it happens, it happens. You know, we don't really know what to do about that. Like, we try to be careful, but on some of those earlier episodes, we were a
little bit more shooting from the hip because it was early and it didn't really matter.
We're like, we're not monetized.
And we also didn't even know, you know, like it was gonna grow.
Yeah.
We could just be viciously targeted too, and that's what happens, you know. And I'm sure
you get flagged for mass reports, and all of a sudden it's like they're coming for you.
Yeah, I mean, just it's good that you have Rumble. You know, keep up. I think I would say keep promoting it because you never know. Like, every time I upload a video, this is why I don't really try to censor myself in videos. I'm like, if it's gonna happen, just let me know now. You know, because it's we're sort of at the mercy of this platform anyway. Whatever they decide is the rules are.
My first channel got nuked with no strikes on it. It had, you know, no warnings, no nothing, and they nuked it on my birthday in like 2021. I guess it was last year. Yeah, it was my 39th birthday. I woke up and it was like, the It's Brentley channel is gone and it's never coming back. And multiple, and I think they said I was cyberbullying. My last episode was talking about Joe Biden's predilections towards the youth. So I guess that's a forbidden subject.
So you were cyberbullying Joe Biden?
I was cyberbullying Joe Biden. Possibly also, you know, some drag kids that I use by name. YouTube really doesn't like it when you mention people by name if you're criticizing them in any way, shape, or form. So I have to I had to get out of that habit.
Wow.
But anyway, if you want to support me criticizing people by name or not, you can, you know, make a donation to the Venmo and Cash App link below. Really appreciate that. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share the show with your friends. Also, check out Gothix's channel. Yes. She is amazing. We love her.
On Twitter, GothixTV, and on
all
Instagram,
the links will be below.
GothixTV. And thank you so much for joining us again. We really appreciate the time. And, you know, I always find your insights really apt.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, guys. Thanks for inviting me.
No problem. We'll do it again. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Recording. Bye bye.